ahead and recognize any elected officials that we have in the room. We have Commissioner Proctor sitting over here. Would you please stand? Oh, yes. Sorry. State Attorney Jack Campbell sitting over here. Would you please stand up? Glad to have you here. Oh, and we also have Akina Akinyemi, our property appraiser. Of course, we have our speakers, Bryan Koon and Gwen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the program chair.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you all for coming and attending today. Like everything else I did over the last 2 years, I'm going to kind of keep mine short and sweet, tell you what you need to know, but I do want to give an introduction for both the speakers today. Ms. Graham, of course, needs very little introduction and is no stranger to NEBA. She first visited us while running for Congress against Steve Sullivan. Many of you would remember that we had a packed house and a great debate that day, so we want to thank her for returning. After serving in Congress, Ms. Graham, she most recently made a very strong run at the governor's seat, and now she is, of course, working with the Rebuild 850, and we look forward to hearing about her actions and her involvement in that today. With her, she has Mr. Bryan Koon, who I met this morning and spoke to a little bit, and I told him, I said, man, you got a very impressive resume, and I started going through this, and he is not only worked in the public and private sector for emergency management and preparedness. Biggest private sector they want to recognize, of course, is Walmart. He oversaw 8,500 facilities and 2.2 million employees worldwide and managed their preparedness and emergency focuses. So definitely look forward to hearing from both of these speakers today, their involvements and their outlook and their plans for rebuilding 850.
Hi, everybody. Well, first, thank you all so much for having Bryan and me here today. This is a passion for both of us to help with the recovery of Hurricane Michael. And as you all are very aware, our recovery is going to be a significant one and a long one. I hope everybody in the room has taken an opportunity to get in your car and drive west of Tallahassee, because it's quite different. I was over in Mariana yesterday, and it still looks like a bomb went off. So let's start with, if it's okay with Bryan, this is our first time doing a little tag team, but we're going to take our show on the road. We're trying it out with y'all first. But we'll start with this little PowerPoint about how Rebuild 850 got started, what our goals are, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, Julia. Well, first, as you know, Hurricane Michael hit the panhandle of Florida on October 10th, 2018. This initiative was started by Speaker Bentz and Speaker Weatherford, and they were kind enough to let me become a part of it after the election cycle was over. So this is what we're dealing with. Billions and billions of dollars of damage. Houses are still, people are still looking for places to live. Communities are really strained. The property base is gone. And at the time that it hit, y'all will remember we had a midterm election right around the corner. So people were not focused on disasters, they were focused on the election. So this is the counties that have been most hit. And this is near and dear to my heart because, if you probably noticed, most of this is my old congressional district. So this is a labor of love on my part to keep the attention on North Florida and make sure that the resources we need to come our way continue to flow. So this is the campaign goals and strategies of Rebuild 850. Increase awareness of recovering communities. Engage Floridians with recovery through donating, volunteering, visiting, and investing. I know you all can read, I don't have to read for you, but partner outreach, we have a lot of partners, wonderful groups that are working with us. Thought leadership, community involvement, earning media, making sure we keep this out in the social media world, and thank you, James Call, for being here today with the Tallahassee Democrat. We want front page above the fold, okay? No worries there. Website development, and I already mentioned social media. So this is our campaign, Rebuild 850, and I didn't even recognize this initially, and I've been wearing this shirt on for quite a bit. You see how that's a heart kind of on its side? With Florida breaking it in half? Yeah, you see that? Yeah. Very creative. Yeah, you have to turn your head sideways. But here are all the partners, and you can see we have just a phenomenal group that are working together to keep Rebuilding 850 in the forefront and get the resources that we need to come. Website development, really important. I'm proud of our website. We've had a lot of traffic. Our social media, if you haven't liked our Facebook page or whatever we have out there, please go and do the Tallahassee Toy Drive, which we did over the holidays. And I will tell you what a joy it was to be able to go into communities that have been devastated, where kids are really struggling. There's a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder out in the communities as a result of this storm. And to be able to hand children toys, it gives me the chills sitting here today. And that was a huge success. And then, of course, resources are critical. I can't even begin to express the needs across the Panhandle that FEMA and HUD and USDA are not going to be able to address. So what Rebuild 850 is trying to do is raise the resources, and we partnered with Volunteer Florida and the state of Florida to bring in resources specifically earmarked for Rebuild 850 for those projects that we can make a difference in our resources, being able to rebuild a church steeple or other issues that are out there that sadly, when I was over in Marietta yesterday, still have not been addressed. Thank you, Mr. Beavis, for your involvement. Rocky Beavis has been very generous. Thank you. Well, here's how much we've raised. It's actually it's more than that now, but we continue to bring in funds, and I appreciate anyone who might wish to help contribute. We make sure that every dollar that we bring in is spent efficiently and effectively to help those that have been devastated by Hurricane Michael. Just some stats. The earned media, and tomorrow we'll be able to put up the story that James Call is writing. And WCTV. We want to lead, okay? Lead on your. Which is your most viewed? That's the one we want to lead on, okay? All right. So looking ahead, Bryan, where did you put your?
I'm at the back.
Okay.
I'm starting here.
Is that you? Okay. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bryan Koon. I have known Bryan for a while. When I was in the Congress, I had the opportunity to work with the DEM, the Department of Emergency Management, on some of the storms we suffered. And he is just a phenomenal resource of knowledge. And I knew that we needed somebody as part of this team who could fill in the gaps with where the federal and state support can be found. And there couldn't be a better person, and I'm so thankful that you were willing to help with this, Bryan. Thanks. So I'm turning it over to you.
I spent my 7 years at the state trying not to be in the newspaper and television.
You've obviously never run for office.
I'm going to scoot a little further away from you because in the picture it's only you in the picture. You know, a big challenge, as in every disaster, you come to a phase where the attention shifts away from it. That's natural. And that's where the disaster recovery gets the hardest, because now people have moved on. There are no longer the TV crews there day in, day out filming all of the heartbreaking stories and the response piece of it. But the fact is that the recovery, like from storms like Michael, will take years and years and years. And so what I want to do today is just show you and put into context some of the numbers and dollars and other things that you will hear. Because as you go out and talk about this storm and try to help raise the awareness, people will ask you questions. Well, what about the FEMA dollars? What about the insurance dollars, et cetera? So I wanted to, again, describe some of those funds, describe some of the impacts, to highlight better for you, I think, where the gaps are and where going to be for this recovery for the years ahead. So forgive me, it's kind of dry, but I'll try to explain why the numbers are important as I show them to you. The first few slides, this one is from the Office of Insurance Regulation from Florida. It shows you to date how many claims have been made against the storm, how many have been paid out, how many opened and closed, etc. You can see there, maybe you can't, roughly about $5.5 billion worth of claims for this. They're still in paying them out, and there'll be a while probably before all these claims are closed. 143,000 claims for that $5.5 billion. That averages out to about $39,000 per claim. You can compare and contrast that one to the next slide, if you will. Her mean, they were, let me see here, a little under 2,000. I'm sorry, that's the wrong number here. Make sure I got the right one on this one.
He's got a lot of numbers.
Yeah, I have a lot of numbers on this one. Skip on to Irma. I don't even care about that. For Irma, a little over 1 million claims, but the average claim was $11,000. So roughly 4 times the average payout for Michael compared to Irma, about 4 times greater. So that gives you some indication of the severity of the damage in that area. Irma hit the entire peninsula of the state, but overall the average damage to homeowners far less by a factor of 4 than what you're experiencing with Michael. So that gives you some idea. And on that first slide that Gwen showed you, that $5 billion estimated damage, I think the total number estimated damage is probably at the end of the day going to be double or triple that. If your insurance claims alone are $5.5 billion, your uninsured losses, doubling or tripling is not a bad rule of thumb for those kind of things. So that's kind of the overall impact from this storm that you're likely to see when they finally add up all of those numbers. Next slide here. This is the color scheme's a little off on this screen, but it's designed to give you some context of where the dollars are going to come from on this. The one line you don't see there, because it would stretch on to 2 or 3 other screens, is that total damage of about, say $10 to $15 billion. The purple color in this one would be the dollars that are potentially going to be available, and then the whatever color it shows up underneath it is going to be the one that's actually been allocated. The biggest chunk of money for this storm is going to come from those insurance dollars, and a good chunk of those have already been paid out. The next largest one will come from FEMA, and FEMA's going to have 3 big chunks of money coming for this. They're going to have the money that's been paid out to individuals, and most of that has already been paid out. They've paid out about $127 million to about 31,000 people. So on average, those families have gotten about $4,300. That money is not going to make those individuals whole. Those payments are never designed to make individuals whole. They are designed to help folks get back up on their feet a little bit. But when people ask, why should we contribute to this effort? What's left to be? Didn't they get all their money from FEMA? The answer is no. The max amount that FEMA will give to an individual family is $34,000. That rarely happens. Again, the average payout for Michael was $4,388. You can compare and contrast that to Irma last year, or in 2017, the average payout was $1,300. So there's another indicator of the severity of the damage if you want to do some direct comparisons, Irma to Michael. An interesting one, in Maria in Puerto Rico, the average payout was $2,700. And so the average payout for Michael was even higher. So it gives, again, some direct comparisons on damage piece right there. So FEMA, if you go back, I still have a couple more on this. FEMA will pay out to individuals. FEMA will pay out to the communities for their damaged roads, infrastructure, etc. And that's probably going to be somewhere in the $1 billion to $2 billion range. Probably, I will just say $1.5 billion for this portion of it. And then there's going to be mitigation dollars that FEMA will invest as well. So roughly, Florida has what they call an enhanced mitigation state. Florida will get about $300 million to help improve the infrastructure and the state harden it against future storms. So all told, FEMA will contribute somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 billion for Michael recovery. The state and locals are also here as well. They have a cost share. The state has a state statute that says that the state will share it with the locals. So right now it's a 25% cost share. The state will pay 12.5%. The locals will pay 12.5%. I show it as a little bit higher on the state side here because some of the more fiscally constrained counties can apply for the state to cover a greater share of it, and they likely will in this scenario. You also have the potential in larger storms like Michael that the federal government will change the cost share to be a 90-10 split, where the federal government picks up 90% of that. That may or may not happen. They're not there yet. It usually takes a while to figure out what the overall expenses for that storm were. Other things to highlight on this one. You're going to see a significant investment from the Department of Defense. That's primarily geared toward the bases that were impacted, not to the communities. However, there will be some economic reverberation in the communities as they do a lot of that work. So that's a good news story. You're also going to see some significant dollars coming from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, hopefully. That's going to be dependent upon Congress determining that they want to invest in these communities to help rebuild them. The state did receive funds after Hermine and Matthew. It did receive funds after Irma. It is likely that they would receive funds after Michael as well. That's probably going to be somewhere in the $1 billion range, and that'll go towards infrastructure improvements, housing, etc. Still to be determined on that, though. You know, I have gotten out of the business of trying to predict what will happen in Washington, D.C., but it's one of the things that needs to happen in order to help fill the coffers to do all the recovery necessary for this piece of it. And then there's the other things that are in there. You will see money from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. There are some standing programs that have done a little bit, but hopefully there will be some monies allocated directly for Michael. As Gwen has mentioned, if you've been out there, you've seen the devastation, particularly to the pine trees. And so there's going to be some significant losses in that piece of it. Those farmers are going to have some significant assistance in getting back up on their feet after that as well. You can go to the next slide. This one again, if you want to get super wonky on all of this, and one of the things that I'll be talking to governmental folks about is I've highlighted the fact that FEMA is only a portion of the recovery dollars that are going to come from the federal, state, and local government on this piece of it. In fact, it may end up being less than half of the dollars associated with this storm. The Government Accounting Office did a study a few years ago to try to capture all of the different dollars that the federal government spends on disaster recovery. It was about $277 billion from 2005 to 2014. FEMA was less than half of that. There are 17 other federal agencies that contribute towards that. So an important thing that needs to be happening right now is for our government officials to go through reports like this and identify all those different funding mechanisms that are available to make sure that we're taking full advantage of them. FEMA's fairly automatic and straightforward. The other ones, though, sometimes require a little bit of work to make sure that they get turned on appropriately. So that's one of the things that needs to be happening right now, is making sure that we're taking full advantage of all of these existing programs and special allocations that can go towards the Hurricane Michael recovery. Next one up here. Again, this is just a listing. You go to the next one. Showing you all the different funding mechanisms that come from there. DOD, DOT, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce. Those are some of your larger agencies in terms of funding post-disaster recovery. Next slide. This one I highlighted. These are the CDBG dollars. You will hear a lot of times in disaster recovery, and you've probably seen the stories from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. It's in the billions of dollars. For Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands last year, Congress allocated $20 billion to assist in the recovery from Irma and Maria for Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. That's going to help rebuild homes, rebuild the power systems, etc. Those are extremely slow and deliberate programs. You can see on there, I don't think Puerto Rico has spent a dime yet of their CDBG allocation. Florida is working on it. But those programs take years. So even if the Congress today says we're going to allocate $1 billion to Hurricane Michael recovery, the truth is it will be a year and probably two before that money starts hitting in the community. And so that's some of where the gap lies. It's not in the total dollar figure, it's the timing of those, because the bigger the dollars, the longer it takes to get out there. And so the people who are living there today, while they may be excited about that prospect 2 years down the road, what they're really dealing with is the struggle of living and recovering today and tomorrow and the next day and the next week. One more, I think. One of the things that I've talked about and Gwen talked about, and will also be an issue to overcome, is in the fundraising side of this thing. As we talked about, it's easier to raise funds immediately as the disaster occurs, because it's on the news, it's relevant, people are paying attention to it. It gets much, much harder the longer you go into a situation. And so one of the things that we're working on with Rebuild 850 is try to help capture the boring data that I've just given you and contextualize it in a way that helps people understand where the need is, help them understand the need exists, and that it's out there today. And so that's one of the challenges we need to do, is how do we keep this out in front of people so they understand what the needs are. That's tough because, if you go to the next slide, there are new disasters every single day. Those two columns on the right-hand side, those are all the presidentially declared major disasters in the United States in 2018. There are 59 of them. So Hurricane Michael in Florida is one line of those 59 lines. Things fall out of the news cycle very quickly, as you can tell. Yeah, I compare and contrast that one. The Hurricane and the other challenge is Hurricane Michael wasn't even the worst storm last year, and so the next big event we have, it will be even move further down. The worst storm last year was Super Typhoon U2, which hit the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, Saipan and Tinian. It had 177 mile-an-hour winds, but because it's 8,000 miles away, and there are only 50,000 people who live there, it fell off the news cycle even faster. So the challenge, again, is how do you make sure that you keep a focus on this to help meet that unmet need. And so as we move forward on this, fundraising, helping raise awareness is one piece of it. The other is really diving into the details of all of those different programs I showed you and identifying where can we make the biggest impact with the dollars we raise. We know we're not going to raise $1 billion, but what can we do with the million or the 2 or the 5 or the 10 million to make an immediate impact and make it the biggest impact on those communities going forward. So I told Gwen I was going to be the straight man on this piece of it. I think I've completely filled that role. And now you got to bring it back to and make it exciting.
Well, I think that you all are getting a very full picture of what we're dealing with in North Florida, and it is going to be a long-term process. And so Rebuild 850's goals, again, are to build resources, which is critically important, to make sure that we are volunteering our time if we can. I mean, there's many groups that if you wish to volunteer your time that are still actively engaged in helping people who have been devastated by Hurricane Michael. Visiting the areas, if you're going to go on a vacation, please get in your car and drive west. Go to Panama City Beach. Go to some of the communities that have been impacted. Bring your resources there. And then we've really got to work to get our businesses in these areas back up and operational, because the tax base is not there anymore. And if there's not businesses there, people leave. I was in Mariana yesterday. People are leaving. And so it's going to be difficult to keep these communities vibrant unless we all are willing to do our part to help them rebuild and help our neighbors to the west rebuild. So I think with that, we probably talked longer than you wanted, Catherine. But,
no, it's great.
Okay.
It's fine.
But we wanted you all to have all the information.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How has Hurricane Michael affect property values? And what can appraisers do, working with our realtors, to mitigate that as just a matter of market forces?
Property values have definitely been hit. We were over in Mariana yesterday talking about this very same issue, and rebuilding the communities is the best way to bring back the desire to buy in the areas that have been hardest hit by Hurricane Michael. So that's why this is a time of the essence issue, and as Bryan talked about, the resources from the federal government are going to be delayed, but many of these communities don't have the time for the delay. So that's why we need to keep the focus on North Florida, keep it in the media, and work to expedite the process as much as possible.
Yes, could you comment on the current status of the idea of using the Triumph funding for part of this?
I believe that's moving forward, and I want to give great credit to Governor DeSantis for his commitment to helping in North Florida. I believe that the Triumph dollars have been identified, and now we're waiting for session, which will be starting soon. All of our wonderful legislators will be joining us in Tallahassee, and I'm hoping that we will be able to have this urgency be something that they're willing to act on and provide the resources. And it seems to me, as someone who has dealt with the BP dollars, that this is an appropriate use of the Triumph funds.
Okay, well, I have been told to let's wrap it up. I do want to say thank you both for coming out. It was very interesting, learned a lot, and definitely see that there's a lot of work ahead. So you got a lot of good business owners and advocates in this room, so I'm sure that they're more than welcome to support that move as well.
Thank you all so very much.
Thank you for